Right now, 176 of the fittest human beings on the planet are somewhere in France, doing something that scientists have described as the ceiling of sustained energy expenditure for humans. They are not doing it for one day. They are doing it for 21. The Tour de France covers 3,321 kilometers, roughly the distance from London to Moscow. It includes 54,450 meters of total elevation gain. That is 6 ascents of Everest. Riders complete it in 3 weeks, racing 6 hours a day, with 1 rest day in between. When researchers at the American Physiological Society studied the energy demands of the Tour, they concluded it may represent the absolute upper limit of what human metabolism can sustain over a prolonged period. Not the upper limit for cyclists, the upper limit for any human doing anything. To understand why, you have to look at the body system by system, because the Tour does not just test fitness. It systematically dismantles the human body, and the rider's job is to hold themselves together long enough to reach Paris. Start with the heart. A Tour de France rider's heart is not a normal heart. Years of endurance training cause the cardiac muscle to thicken and the chambers to enlarge, a condition called athlete's heart, or eccentric left ventricular hypertrophy. A 2-time Tour champion tested at the GSK Human Performance Laboratory showed a VO2 peak, the maximum rate of oxygen consumption, of 84 milliliters per kilogram per minute. The average sedentary adult sits around 35. Elite distance runners typically reach 70 to 75. Tour riders occupy a category of cardiovascular capacity that barely exists in the general population. If a cardiologist looked at a Tour rider's cardiac scan without knowing who they were, the enlargement would in many cases trigger an immediate referral. The heart that wins the Tour de France would concern a doctor seeing it for the first time. During racing, that heart operates at between 70 and 90% of its maximum rate for hours at a stretch. On mountain stages like the Col du Tourmalet, which Pogacar attacked just days ago, it sustains near maximal output for 45 minutes or more at altitude, where thinner air means less oxygen per breath, and the heart must compensate by beating faster and harder. Now consider the fuel required to run that engine. Tour riders burn approximately 6,000 calories per day during racing, nearly 3 times the daily energy expenditure of a moderately active adult. Over 21 days, that is 126,000 calories. To put that in perspective, a person could eat nothing but McDonald's Big Macs for 3 weeks and still not consume what a Tour rider burns in the same period. The riders eat constantly. Rice cakes, gels, bidons of carbohydrate drink, bananas handed through the window of a team car while traveling at 60 kilometers per hour. A professional rider aims to consume between 80 and 120 grams of carbohydrate per hour during racing, 8 times what the gut can typically absorb without training. Years of practice have literally changed the gut's capacity to process fuel while in motion. And yet the nutrition still cannot fully compensate. Research published in the International Journal of Sports Medicine on Tour riders found that despite aggressive fueling strategies, riders are in a state of net energy deficit throughout the race. The body fills that gap by turning on itself. Stored fat is consumed first. Riders arrive at the Tour lean and leave leaner. But fat alone cannot fuel the intensity of mountain racing, and so the body begins breaking down muscle tissue for energy. By the final week of the race, riders have typically lost between 15 and 20% of their total muscle mass. The legs that climb the Col du Tourmalet in week 1 are not the same legs that climb Alpe d'Huez in week 3. They are smaller, weaker, and less efficient, and the riders are winning or losing hundreds of seconds per kilometer on them. The muscular damage compounds in ways that go beyond simple fatigue. Research shows that after the first week, riders enter a state of catabolism. The body is breaking down tissue faster than it can rebuild it. Inflammatory markers spike. Free radicals generated during intense exercise accumulate faster than the body's antioxidant systems can neutralize them. The sheer mechanical stress of pedaling hundreds of thousands of times also destroys red blood cells through a process called hemolysis, the physical compression of cells passing through the capillaries of the foot while pedaling. Studies on Tour riders have estimated losses of up to 200 billion red blood cells over the course of the race, cells that carry the oxygen the muscles desperately need. Then there is bone. Cycling is a non-weight-bearing exercise. The bike takes the impact, not the skeleton. This sounds like an advantage until you consider what bones need to stay dense: mechanical stress. Without it, they weaken. A landmark German study in the 1990s compared the bone density of weightlifters, boxers, and Tour de France riders against age-matched controls. The weightlifters and boxers had higher bone density than average. The cyclists' spines were 10% less dense than the controls, their hips 14% less dense. 3 weeks of racing also causes riders to sweat out enormous quantities of calcium and potassium, the minerals that build and maintain bone. By Paris, the skeleton of a Tour rider is measurably weaker than when they left the Grand Départ. The immune system tells perhaps the most counterintuitive story. Popular wisdom holds that exercise strengthens immunity. At moderate intensities, this is true. At the intensity sustained during the Tour de France, the opposite occurs. Intense, prolonged exercise drives down the blood's population of lymphocytes, the white blood cells that identify and destroy pathogens. This creates what exercise scientists call the open window, a period of immunosuppression after each stage when the body is significantly more vulnerable to infection. Riders spend up to 6 hours per day breathing hard on crowded roads, sharing team buses, massage tables, and hotel rooms. By the time the peloton reaches Paris, exercise physiologist Alan Lim has estimated that 30 to 40% of riders are sick with some form of upper respiratory tract infection. They are crossing the finish line of one of the greatest athletic achievements in human sport while fighting a cold. The brain is under its own form of assault. Central nervous system fatigue, distinct from muscular fatigue, accumulates across the 3 weeks in ways that affect decision-making, reaction time, and pain tolerance. Riders make tactical decisions at speed, in traffic, in crosswinds, while experiencing what would be classified as significant physical pain in any other context. Research published in the Journal of Science and Cycling found that by the final week of the Tour, many amateur riders following the same route could no longer sustain the power outputs they had managed in week 1. In some cases, heart rates would not rise above 100 beats per minute, not because the riders were fit and efficient, but because the central nervous system was refusing to push the body any harder. The brain, in effect, was protecting itself from the athlete. So how do they recover? Barely and strategically. Each night, the focus is on what sports scientists call the 4 Rs: rehydration, refueling, repair, and rest. Riders consume recovery shakes within 30 minutes of finishing, targeted to spike insulin and drive amino acids into damaged muscle tissue. Physiotherapists work through the night on legs that have been under load for 6 hours. Sleep is maximized. Some teams use altitude tents in hotel rooms to stimulate red blood cell production overnight. Ice baths, compression garments, and anti-inflammatory protocols are standard. And then, 8 or 9 hours later, they do it again. What makes this physiologically remarkable is not just the individual demands, but their accumulation. The body does not reset between stages. Fatigue compounds, damage compounds. The inflammatory load from stage 10 is still present on stage 15. Researchers at the American Physiological Society concluded that Tour riders operate near what may be the absolute ceiling of sustained human energy expenditure, higher even than Antarctic explorers or ultramarathon runners measured over the same time period. The Tour is not the hardest single day of exercise a human can endure. It is the hardest sustained period of exercise a human can endure, repeated, for 3 weeks. And what separates the rider who wins from the rider who finishes is not simply fitness. It is the capacity to suffer efficiently, to manage the rate of physiological destruction just well enough to keep the legs turning while everyone else's begin to fail. Pogacar's attack on the Tourmalet this week was not a display of fresh strength. It was a display of a body being destroyed more slowly than the bodies of every other rider on that mountain. Welcome to ExpertiseDive. If you have a question about any of the science covered here, drop it in the comments. We read every one.